Hi everybody, I'm Graham Clarke. I'm a metallurgist at Clarke Knives in Wiltshire. We're here today to talk about making Damascus, something I do a lot of, and I'd like to share some of my ideas on how we can make better Damascus. So you can ask questions, or you want me to just start rabbiting on? The first thing that a lot of people ask me is, do I use a gas forge? Can I use a coke forge? Look, at the end of the day, when you're making Damascus, you're using a forge to get metal hot. So how you get it hot doesn't really matter, but both have got their advantages and disadvantages. Coke forges, I have to confess, I don't use them. I never have used them, but I can see, I've worked with people who have, and I can see the advantage of them. They have a fantastic atmosphere. So inside the middle of that ball of red hot coke, there's no oxygen. There's so much, because coke is just pure carbon, it's burning up all the air, it's generating heat. And in the middle of there, you've got a pretty much neutral or reducing atmosphere, unless you're blowing an extra lot of air in there to get it hot. So in that respect, you've got, when you're forging your Damascus together, you don't want to be creating oxides on the surface, because that's going to make it not so easy for the damn stuff to stick together. The big disadvantage that I see with a coke forge is controlling temperature. Now, I've worked with people who are absolute experts at it, and they can probably control it within 20 or 30 degrees, but it's not something I would ever want to do. And the ability that a coke forge has got to actually create too much heat is very, very good. i.e. you pull your piece of metal out and it's not there, it's melted and it's laying in the bottom of the forge. So yeah, coke forges, I'm not going to go into any great depth. I've got no experience of them, and to me, controlling the temperature is a huge problem, and you need a lot of expertise to be good at it. So I use a gas forge. I'll make my own gas forges. They're very simple boxes made out of refractory brick, little burners in the top which blow air in, Venturi burners, and you've got an air control on the top of them which you can shut down the amount of air. Now, it's very important to have that, because that is how you actually control the atmosphere inside your furnace. Now, you've basically got three atmospheres you can have inside the furnace: a reducing atmosphere, a neutral atmosphere, or an oxidizing atmosphere. And what do we use? Well, a reducing atmosphere is not going to oxidize the surface of your steel. What it means by, go back to a neutral atmosphere, means you've got exactly the right ratio of gas and air going in. You're going to get a good lot of heat out of it, because you're burning all the gas. There shouldn't be any oxygen left over, but to control it exactly on neutral, well, you actually need equipment in there which is going to measure the oxygen content of your outflow gases and then control the amount of air that you allow in. It's not something the average hobbyist is going to do. So therefore we come back to saying, right, well, I've now got a stack of Damascus all tacked up. It's in my forge getting nice and hot. I need to forge weld it together. So the first thing you need is you've got to keep those surfaces clean. Preparation is something we'll come to in a minute, but let's just get past the actual forge part first. You've got this stack of metal all nice and clean, and you've tacked up the edges and you want to get it hot. You've got to make sure you don't start oxidizing those surfaces. With carbon steel, it's not too critical. If you do get a minimal amount of oxide forming on the surface, it actually dissolves into the metal during the forging process. It doesn't seem to cause any problem. It doesn't cause delamination problems. The oxygen diffuses through the metal and probably ends up on the outside, back in the atmosphere again. I'm not 100% sure on that one, but it doesn't create a problem. It does if you're trying to do stainless steel. A reducing atmosphere in a gas forge does not remove oxide from stainless steel. So if you're trying to make stainless steel clad San Mai, you've got to use a different system. I put mine in a canister and I put a reactive gas through it, but that's a different atmosphere altogether, and we're not going to go into that kind of detail here today. But if you see people who do advertise, we make stainless steel San Mai and it's been welded up in a gas-rich atmosphere. Yeah, it'll stick together, but you've still got a lot of oxides on those interfaces, so it's not always as perfect as it should be. But then again, for making a knife, they don't come apart, so it's probably good enough. It's just not the way that I do it. Right, so when we're starting to make our billet of Damascus, the first thing is cleaning up the surfaces. We've got to make sure that we've got the surfaces as clean as possible so that when we come to weld them together, we're not entrapping rubbish, oxides, swarf, dirt, grease, all these kind of things that will stop the layers from welding together. Because what we're doing by forge welding is we're getting up to a high enough temperature and pressing those surfaces close enough together that the crystals of iron within the layers start to grow across the boundary. So where you've got two pieces of metal sitting together, like so, and we're putting pressure against them, the layers of steel are made up of crystals, and we want the crystals to grow across that boundary. When they grow across that boundary, the two pieces become one, or 30 pieces become one, depending how many layers are in your stack. Now, in order for that to happen, the surfaces need to be clean, free of muck and rubbish, at a high enough temperature that the crystals are going to grow very quickly, and under enough pressure that the surfaces are touching each other. So, first of all, if you're making up an original stack of Damascus, you've generally got nice clean sheets of steel. They're generally fairly flat. What I do is I put them through a degreasing process. I've got an ultrasonic degreaser, but then I'll make a lot of Damascus, giving them a wipe over with acetone or methylated spirits, alcohol, will clean any grease and dirt off the surface. Never ever clean a surface like that and leave it, because there's always a residue left behind from a solvent cleaner. Solvent cleaner means exactly that. It's dissolving up the dirt, so your piece of rag has got a mixture now of cleaner and bits of grease particularly in it, and that damp layer that's left on the surface, the solvent evaporates off and puts a little bit of grease back on. This was something I learned at university. We were trying to forge weld steel and aluminium together, and it was not until we degreased and then abraded the surface and then tried to weld it together that it would actually work. If we did it the other way, we abraded the surface and then cleaned it with a degreaser, it always came out as two pieces at the other side of the mill. This was something we were doing cold. It was a cold rolling process, but it did work when we did it the other way around. So bringing that process back into what we're doing to make in Damascus, I will degrease and then I will lightly abrade the surface. You can do it with a grinding belt. You can use a fairly coarse one. You can use a 36 or a 60 or an 80 grit belt, whichever suits your fancy. But to be quite honest, I use a 3M Scotch-Brite belt. Scotch-Brite belts come in various grades. The very coarse one, the coarsest of the lot, is absolutely magic, and it just scratches that surface with a very coarse satin finish on, and I never have any trouble welding stuff together. Weld the stack up. Now, when I put the stack together, I put all my layers, I put them in an old machine vise. The kind of things you see on a milling machine that are very, very strong, and you can weld up, you can wang up that handle. I do it with a hammer, very, very tight. So you're squashing those surfaces flat together as much as you can. And then weld down the corners or on the ends, any kind of welding, MIG welder, stick welder, doesn't really matter. Weld a little piece of, I use a bit of rebar which I put on the end to make it into a billet that I can handle in and out the furnace. But what you're doing, you're getting those layers pressed together as much as possible. You know they're clean because you've cleaned them. You've degreased them, you've abraded them, you've pressed them. That's good. The tighter you can get them together before you put them into the forge, the less likelihood there is of any air or oxygen getting in there to create oxides on the surface. So now that's it ready, and now we've got to get our forge nice and hot and get the right atmosphere inside there to get ready to weld.
Thank you to all our sponsors who made this video possible for you. Clarke Knives, who offer professional heat treatment and Damascus billets for knife makers, and Multi-Tool Products Europe, who sell the 84 engineering belt grinders and even heat kilns specifically for knife makers. Links are in the description. Go and check them out. Massive thank you to all our Patreon supporters. If you enjoy the content that we do, and if you find value in the content we create, you can support our channel at patreon.com/UKBladeShow, or links are in the description below. Let me know if there's other topics that you feel will be worth discussing relating to knife making. See you in the next video.